Welcome to the next module, Freshwater and Marine Biodiversity. Let us look at what is Arctic freshwater biodiversity. Circumpolar Biodiversity Monitoring Program, freshwater group of the Arctic Council's Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna Working Group prepares the Arctic freshwater biodiversity. The Circumpolar Biodiversity Monitoring Program CBMP, freshwater group of the Arctic Council's Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna Working Group prepares the State of the Arctic Freshwater Biodiversity Report SAFBR. This report highlights the impacts of climate change, human activities and other environmental pressures on Arctic freshwater biodiversity. Let us look at what are the trends identified so far. There are various key areas given. The first one is threat to Arctic freshwater ecosystems. The details given are Arctic freshwater ecosystems like lakes, rivers, wetlands are highly threatened by climate change and human development. What is the impact of biodiversity and ecosystem services? This climate change and the human development can significantly affect biodiversity and ecosystem services. Examples, water purification, carbon storage, etc. So what are the patterns of biodiversity across the Arctic which was found? The ecoregions with warmer temperature and connections to the mainlands generally have higher biodiversity than those with cold temperature, that means high latitudes or altitudes, or those isolated on islands. What are the predominant drivers of freshwater biodiversity? Temperature is the overriding and predominant driver of Arctic freshwater ecosystem. So this is what we call as Arctic amplification effect. Other drivers include climate, geographical connectivity, geology and water chemistry. So what are the data gaps in understanding the biodiversity? So we look at the existing data on Arctic freshwater biodiversity patterns which are insufficient for all ecoregion. That means we do not have complete information about the entire Arctic region. And increased sampling and research are needed to better understand biodiversity change across the Arctic. So these are all the key trends identified by the report. So let us look at what are the factors that contribute to biodiversity. The key drivers of Arctic freshwater biodiversity include climate, geographical connectivity, geology and smaller scale environmental parameters like water chemistry are the key drivers in the Arctic freshwater biodiversity. And when we look at benthic microinvertebrate diversity, so here biodiversity of benthic microinvertebrates in rivers and lakes decrease at a higher latitude, particularly above 68 degree north. This decline is linked to the decreasing maximum summer temperature. And when we look at cold tolerance and latitudinal decline, the cold temperature tolerance limits the number of benthic macroinvertebrate species in the high Arctic, with the diversity strongly related to temperature gradients. So what is the latitudinal trends in other freshwater ecosystem components? The latitudinal trends in biodiversity are weaker for the other FECs. For example, fish, plankton, diatoms, macrophytes. But the higher latitude systems show difference in diversity and composition compared to lower latitude systems. And what are the factors that affect the biodiversity patterns? Difference in biodiversity and compositions are influenced by temperature, precipitation gradients, glaciation history, barriers to movement, and bedrock geology. So what are the key points from the State of the Arctic Freshwater Biodiversity Report? The climate change and the temperature increase is a key factor. So this affects various ecosystems. The warmer temperature disrupts freshwater ecosystems. It shifts the species distribution and hydrological cycles. Earlier snowmelt and reduced ice cover leads to lots of change in freshwater ecosystems. So in the case of biodiversity loss and changes, the species that are highly specialized in the Arctic conditions are highly vulnerable to the climate change. The potential northward migration of temperate species are also happening simultaneously. So when we look at nutrient entrenchment and pollution, the thawing permafrost and agricultural runoff lead to nutrient enrichment, that is eutrophication. Similarly, mining, oil and gas pollution degrade water quality. This affects the Arctic freshwater ecosystems. And this leads to shifting of hydrological cycle. So how does it happen? The altered precipitation patterns and evaporation rates affects the amount of freshwaters that is present in the Arctic region. The thawing permafrost release organic carbon, which increases the dissolved carbon components. Glacial retreat and slow met changes water availability. Along with that, invasive species from the southern region are also making into Arctic. So the warmer temperature and human activity may facilitate the spread of invasive species from the southern region. Disruption of native species and food webs are affected because of this change. So what are the shifting ecosystems due to these changes? There is a decline in freshwater services. Also, it affects local communities relying on freshwater for drinking, fishing and subsistence. So what are the other changes which happens to ice and snow cover? The loss of ice habitat for species, especially for spawning. Polar bear finds it difficult to hunt because they hunt in the ice. Similarly, change in water temperature regulation and nutrient cycling also affects the food web. What are the result of this change in ice and snow cover? This leads to shifting boundaries of freshwater ecosystems. So the northern freshwater ecosystem may become less suitable for Arctic species, and also southern species may move into the region, disrupting the balance. So these are all the effects. And how do we conserve or manage these changes? So monitoring freshwater ecosystem is essential for adaptive management. Also, collaboration with indigenous community and international cooperation is key for maintaining the biodiversity in the Arctic region. So here are the impacts of climate change on Arctic freshwater system. The warmer and wetter climate affects the region. Mainly, the higher concentration of dissolved organic matter, minerals and nutrients are found in the freshwater ecosystem. The impact by the humans include population growth, which leads to potential for further degradation of the freshwaters, and also nutrient entrenchment in the freshwater system. That means nutrient runoff from agricultural use of fertilizers, pesticides and manure get deposited in the Arctic freshwater ecosystem. When we look at the lake and river ecosystem, the major ecosystem impacts include decreased light penetration in the lake. So that means that leads to lesser production of the primary producers, and nutrient entrenchment due to the runoff of agricultural use, that is also seen there, and increased sedimentation also is observed. So these changes affects the biodiversity, and this also affects the occurrence of species and biomass of the Arctic species. All these things are affected because of the change in the ecosystem. And also we are seeing the change in climate zones. That means boundaries of Arctic climate zones like subarctic, low Arctic and high Arctic regions are shifting because of the climate change. In the future also, this is expected to shift, and there is an overall reduction in the Arctic ecoregion extent because of this shift. And moreover, based on the temperature and the vegetation conditions, we are seeing lots of change in the Arctic freshwater ecosystem. So here is the map which talks about that, the effect of climate change and the human development of Arctic freshwater ecosystems. So the dark red line, whatever is showing, is the CAF of boundary. So the warmer water temperature in the Arctic region, especially in the rivers and lakes, leads to an increase in the overall biodiversity as the southern species expand their range towards northward. But the highly cold adapted and cold tolerant species that currently inhabit Arctic will be at risk due to competition from the non-native species, and they face possible extirpation when their thermal tolerance are exceeded. Most of the Arctic species are tolerant to low temperature, but when the temperature increases, they are affected. And also, when the southern species move towards the Arctic because of the warmer temperature, there is a competition for the Arctic species survival. So the cold water endemic species unique to the Arctic, such as Arctic char, may suffer regional loss with the potential for extinction in extreme cases. So what are the patterns of biodiversity across the Arctic? So we have various Arctic regions. One is Fennoscandian lakes, that is inland non-mountainous region. So here macrophytes, benthic, macroinvertebrates, zooplankton and fishes are found in lakes. And in the lakes in coastal Alaska, diatom and phytoplankton species exist. Ecoregions in Canada, Greenland, Iceland and Russia, these are less diverse because of high cold conditions. Fennoscandia, coastal Alaska and western and southern Canada, their riverine diatoms, benthic macroinvertebrates and fish survive. So what are the reasons for the varied biodiversity across the Arctic? The first one is the warmer climate in the Fennoscandia and southern ecoregions of Canada, as well as the strong geographical connectivity to the mainland, explains the overall high biodiversity in this region, because there are certain areas where there is high biodiversity. Even though we say Arctic has low biodiversity, few regions in the Arctic have high biodiversity. The high connectivity of Alaskan coastal region and lack of ice cover in the last glaciation may have contributed to high biodiversity. But on the other hand, the biodiversity in the mountains and alpine ecoregions of North America and Fennoscandia is generally lower than the surrounding ecoregions for both lakes and rivers. This likely reflects the harsh environment conditions generally found in mountain regions, or possibly the effect of dispersal barriers to species such as migrating fish. Similarly, the biodiversity is lower on remote islands where movement and introduction of species can be limited. This is particularly evident in Greenland, Iceland and Faroe Islands, Svalbard and Wrangel Islands. So here are the various factors contributing to biodiversity. So we will look at the important species benthic macroinvertebrates. Climate, geographical connectivity, geology and small-scale environmental parameters such as water chemistry are key drivers in Arctic freshwater biodiversity. So how do they affect benthic macroinvertebrates? They have decreased at a higher latitude, particularly above 68 degree north, and these are related to decreasing maximum summer temperature, because the benthic macroinvertebrates are reducing due to higher or warmer temperature in the Arctic region, because these are tolerance for cold temperature, due to which there is a limited biodiversity. And other freshwater ecosystem components which affect the biodiversity include fish, plankton, diatoms and macrophytes. So the latitudinal trends weaker compared to the benthic macroinvertebrates. For these species, fish, plankton, diatoms and macrophytes, there is a diversity is much weaker. Similarly, high latitude lakes and rivers differ in diversity and comparison. And all these factors are affected by temperature and precipitation gradients, glaciation history, barriers to movement, bedrock geology, and which is also being affected by water chemistry. So these are all the various factors that contribute to biodiversity.